Well, I didn't expect this. Let's begin. The article says that GP practices are set to receive more cash this year to end the morning dash for appointments. Ministers will announce this week that a primary care plan drawn up by the NHS and government will set out a £240 million scheme to improve access to doctors. And it includes cash for upgrades to online and phone systems so patients can reach their surgery without the scramble for an 8 AM appointment. Some 6,500 receptionists and staff will also receive extra training to act as care navigators and better direct people to the most suitable healthcare professional. The government said that the plan would ensure that patients never get engaged tones and find out on the same day when and how they will see their GP rather than having to call back multiple times. Health Secretary Steve Barclay said, "We are already making real progress with 10% more GP appointments happening every month compared to before the pandemic." I've got to be a little bit careful how I say this. Ruth Rankine, hope I pronounced that right, of the NHS Confederation said services would only meet demand with action to increase the actual numbers of GPs, nurses and other vital posts in the NHS at a time when there are over 130,000 vacancies. Professor Camilla Hawthorne of the Royal College of GP said, "We need thousands more GPs as we were promised at the last election in 2019. Well, of course I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that the pandemic actually probably slowed that down a little bit, as it did with nearly every other thing under the sun it seems. But then again, I remember the days when you could just ring up your doctor and actually go to the appointment the same day without any need for them to call you back, or these new sort of style telephone appointments that they apparently have nowadays. I mean, to be honest, I haven't actually been to the doctor in years. So I'm kind of one of those guys that will only end up seeing the doctor if either my arm or penis falls off. But anyway, but let's face it, to be honest, they do actually have a few problems here, which is not exactly helping things. First of all, of course, you've got the increased demand as our population goes up. Let's just say by more than we're expecting, which, to be honest, I guess some of it is the amount of people arriving here illegally every day from the safe country of France that the government weren't really counting on, were they? And of course, a few other things. But then there's also the way things have changed since the pandemic, isn't it? I mean, quite often nowadays, we see people wanting to do video calls over the internet rather than actually go to meetings. Which makes me wonder, how long will it actually be before the government or whoever actually suggests this as a way of seeing your doctor? And you can actually show them if you've done something to your arm rather than just telling them over the phone. But that's just not the same as seeing the doctor in person, is it? Because he can't exactly examine it over the phone unless he says turn left, turn right, zoom in or whatever. But let's just hope that any money that the NHS does receive won't get lost with their, let's just say, woke positions that they often employ nowadays. I mean, if I remember rightly, a few months or maybe actually a year ago, I think they employed someone to do with diversity or something like that, when actually the NHS is there to care for our health rather than woke policies. So anything they do receive needs to be watched very carefully how it's spent, in my opinion. Sir Keir Starmer was today accused of eyeing up a dirty deal with the Lib Dems to become PM. Both opposition parties yesterday left the door open to a post-election pact, and even a top Labour MP refused to rule out radical changes to the voting system, if that is what it takes. Analysis of last week's local elections shows that Britain is on course for a hung parliament at the next general election, with Labour falling short of a majority. And SNP leaders, of course, have already boasted that they could pull the strings of a weakened Westminster government if Sir Keir Starmer is needed the numbers. And today, Lib Dem boss Sir Ed Davey hinted they could get into bed with the Labour chief. Oh yeah. But while dismissing the prospect of a hypothetical question, he told the BBC the focus is on getting rid of Conservative MPs. "I will make no apology for that." Labour Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting also failed to extinguish the idea of teaming up with the Lib Dems. He was confident that Labour will bag a majority, although warned against complacency. Asked if Sir Keir would cave into Sir Ed Davey's demand for proportional representation, Mr Streeting said, "We're not even entertaining that prospect. I just don't think it is the scenario that we are going to be in after the next general election." But remember, David Cameron gave Nick Clegg a referendum to abolish the first past the post, which was rejected as an incentive to join in coalition in 2010. Well, of course, nowadays in government, it always seems like there's some sort of dodgy deal or another turning up, doesn't it? No matter what party it is or what's going on. But to be honest, I don't think it's that good for democracy if two sort of parties try to team up in a way that means one party would get more of a vote than they would have done otherwise. Let's say if they pull out certain constituencies and things like that. But then again, of course, Nigel Farage, if I remember rightly, done a similar thing with the Brexit Party in 2019. But I guess that is slightly different because Labour and the Lib Dems are a second and third party, aren't they? Whereas the Brexit Party was back then, we're just getting started out, and it remains to be seen how much of the vote they would have actually got. If they did put people in all constituencies where the Lib Dems do strangely have some people actually voting for them, even after they were very keen on the idea of overturning the referendum result with this whole second referendum and all that sort of stuff, which kind of actually goes against their name really, doesn't it? But then again, of course, Rishi does actually have a problem himself, doesn't he? I know people actually vote for the party rather than the person, but I don't think that's how people actually see it across the country, because the leader of the party is always shoved in our faces, aren't they? So even if it is the case we do vote for the party, that is not how it often comes across, which could actually be a massive problem for Rishi, couldn't it? Because let's face it, to be honest with you, I'd rather vote for Mr. Blobby than Rishi. And no, I don't mean Keir Starmer. In fact, if anything, this time I think I'll vote for Reform UK. But then again, of course, Rishi does have over a year to try and turn things around. And let's face it, a year is quite a long time in politics, isn't it? Even a week is. Can you remember? It was over about a week and a half or something like that, that Boris was basically forced into resigning, when a week or so beforehand you wouldn't have thought that would have happened. Although one thing Rishi actually does have on his side is what the manifesto might actually be, unless of course he does a Liz Truss sort of style mess up of the delivery. Either way though, I think any coalition is actually going to be bad for the country in general, isn't it? Because you'll have some sort of mishmash or mixed sort of government policies of the two parties rather than just the overall winning party. Thousands of prisoners on day release could help fill key job vacancies under plans being considered by ministers. Inmates will be let out on licence for work placements and apprenticeships in sectors struggling to find staff, such as construction, haulage and hospitality. Training them would reportedly save billions of pounds a year by cutting reoffending and by boosting the labour market. The recommendation is in a report from think tank the Centre for Social Justice that is backed by prison ministers Damien Hines. He said, "We're getting more offenders into jobs than ever, but we know we do need to go further. This report shines a light on the importance of and the opportunities in getting more prison leavers into work. Some 50,000 inmates end their terms every year, but only a quarter are in work 6 months later. Most are unemployed and at a serious risk of reoffending, which costs taxpayers £18 billion a year, according to the CSJ. It says having a job cuts reoffending by between a third and a half. The centre-right body wants the government to go further and faster to increase the total number of jail leavers in work. The report states a custodial sentence and a deprivation of liberty should serve as a punishment for and a deterrent to committing a crime. But prison time must also be used as an opportunity to ensure that the cycle of reoffending is broken. And there is a compelling body of domestic and international evidence showing that work as a route out of crime. To be honest though, while £18 billion is admittedly quite a large amount of money to be saved, I don't think in general this is really sending the right sort of message, because prisons are there as a punishment or consequence of a person committing a crime, aren't they? And of course when people are in there they are serving their times for the crime. However, that in general should give them a deterrent not to commit the crime again. Not do your time and you get a job at the end of it, because prisons should be a punishment, not a fast track into work scheme. Especially with the amount of jobs that require all sorts of qualifications nowadays. You can't walk from one job to another anymore, can you? And let's face it, it's hardly going to be fair for the rest of us who have to go through all sorts of hoops just to even get a job interview, it seems. Whereas a prisoner would presumably just go straight into the job. So to be honest, I don't really think that's sending the right kind of message, is it? It does actually make me wonder if any companies that would take these prisoners on would probably be paid some sort of bonus or something like that as a thank you for taking them on, or maybe actually something towards their wages, which I'm guessing the businesses might actually love. And if you've got that option of that money coming in or regular person applying for a job, which one do you think they'd choose? And yes, admittedly they are in sectors that apparently people don't like working for, but at the end of the day, if people are on benefits and capable of doing that particular job, then they really should be doing that, unless they're incapable of doing it for some sort of disability, handicap, sickness or whatever, instead of turning down a perfectly good job just to stay sitting on their bums on the dole. In which case I think that some change really does need to be brought in to sort out any such problems, rather than trying to plug the gap with prisoners being released and giving them a fast track into work where other people sometimes struggle. But let's face it, doesn't really seem too much of a deterrent, does it, knowing that if you go to prison you'll be offered a job at the end of it. So whether or not this would work or not is another matter indeed, especially when there might actually be more eco-idiot prisoners with what the government are planning to do in this video. Anyway, subscribe for more and I'll see you in the next one.